The city's stone alleyways were as narrow as a trap and as grim as the night sky before a storm. Horses' hooves pounded out the relentless rhythm of the chase, and the black cloaks of the guards billowed in the wind. The commander, furious, rode at the front, gripping his sword tightly. He yanked the collar of the first man he saw in the tavern and pressed the blade to his throat. A man with silver hair and a green-eyed woman. Have you seen them? The terrified man frantically shook his head. The commander narrowed his eyes. He knew the passerby was lying, but in the end, he shoved him aside, letting him collapse onto the floor. The guards exchanged glances, preparing to move on. Wait! The commander's voice struck like thunder before a storm. His gaze dropped to the footprints on the floor. Odd. Mismatched. The woman's shoes were too large, while the man's boots were too small. A sudden realization struck him. The fugitives had disguised themselves. He whirled around, gripping his sword even tighter. Everyone, to the train station. His eyes burned with fury, and a wicked smile stretched across his lips. The train raced through emerald forests and golden fields, leaving behind the narrow streets and a relentless pursuit. In one of the compartments sat an unusual pair, a stout woman in an elegant lace dress, and beside her, a thin, almost delicate man in a dark suit. But there was something peculiar. The refined lady, hiding her face behind a newspaper, was none other than Duke Yulikiy, and the man in the suit, his wife, Medi. Yulikiy shifted uncomfortably, the unfamiliar garments making his skin itch. His long locks cascaded over his shoulders, and the dress sleeves chafed against his arms. He cast a glance at Medi, who lounged comfortably in her masculine attire, legs crossed, enjoying the situation far too much. Yulikiy sighed and hid behind the newspaper again, but then froze. On the front page, their photo was prominently displayed, and the headline read, Duke Yulikiy Kuan London's and his wife Medi, a wedding that shook the capital. Yulikiy scowled. It's a very flattering picture, Medi commented casually, a smirk tugging at her lips. Yulikiy rolled his eyes and hid behind the newspaper again, but the hushed murmurs had already begun. Curious whispers filled the compartment. Did the Duke really marry a girl from the slums? They say they're both insane. He loves her so much he'd do anything. Yulikiy abruptly lowered the newspaper and hissed. How much longer is this ride? I'm wearing a damn dress. Medi, barely holding back her laughter, stood up. There will be a stop soon, and you'll be able to take off the dress. The Duke's eyes lit up. Yulikiy sat for a few more seconds in the sweet confidence that he would soon rid himself of this cursed dress and return to his usual appearance. But his joy faded when he noticed that the train wasn't slowing down at all. Medi, the train isn't stopping, he muttered, glancing out the window. She didn't even look surprised. He turned his bewildered gaze to her. She laughed, as if he had asked about something utterly mundane. Medi didn't answer, only gave him a sly smile and stepped closer to the door of the carriage. The train was rushing at full speed, the roar of the wheels drowning out all sounds, the wind tugging at their clothes. But she didn't seem the least bit concerned. You've never jumped from a train before? She raised an eyebrow in surprise. Yulikiy was stunned. He thought she was joking, but she only laughed at him. You know, you always scream like that when you're scared. But Medi wasn't listening anymore. She effortlessly stepped onto the railing and looked down. Yulikiy lunged forward to catch her, but it was too late. She jumped. His heart pounded wildly. He felt a scream lodge in his throat, his hands gripping the doorframe so tightly his knuckles turned white. Yulikiy stared into the distance in panic until he saw her. Medi tumbled across the grass, her suit covered in dust, but she was unharmed. In just a moment, she got to her feet with ease. She was smiling, clearly pleased with herself. Yulikiy's heart raced anxiously. He could have told her exactly what he thought of this insane plan, but he said nothing. Medi stood below, her chestnut hair tousled by the wind, her eyes alight with excitement. She reached out to him, as if inviting him to join her. There was no time to think. He gripped the railing, took a deep breath, shut his eyes, and jumped. The world flipped upside down. The wind tore at his dress. His wig flew off, revealing his silver hair. He was falling, screaming, not having a single moment to think about the consequences. Just a few months ago, Duke Yulikiy disappeared into the slums every night. He drank himself senseless, spent hours gambling, and wasted more on liquor than ordinary people earned in a year. He had once been the pride of the empire, the son of the crown prince, the only nephew of the emperor. His life was supposed to be filled with glory and greatness, but he chose another path. After losing his parents, he hid. He didn't want to attract the attention of his uncle, a man far too interested in his disappearance. So Yulikiy played his game. He became a drunk, a fool, a scoundrel. People stopped taking him seriously, and to the emperor, he was nothing more than a pathetic failure. But even after years spent in the city's darkest corners, he never grew used to the slums. They stank of cheap alcohol, decay, and malice. There was no honor here, only greed and betrayal. He hated this place, yet every night he returned to it, as if it were his punishment. That evening, as always, he was laying out cards on a time-worn table, listening to the drunken laughter around him, when her voice cut through the hum of the crowd. She laughed loudly, demanding more beer, slamming her mug against the table. His eyes instinctively found her in the crowd. She was loud, too loud. Medi commanded attention with every word, every gesture. She joked, laughed, waved her hands as if daring the entire room to look only at her. Boldly, she declared she would beat everyone at cards and pulled a heavy pouch of coins from beneath her clothes. Yulikiy frowned. The woman was undeniably beautiful, but gods, she was insufferable. He stood up, unwilling to linger a moment longer. But unfortunately for him, their eyes met. Medi hesitated. She hadn't seen him here before. He didn't look like someone who belonged at a place like this. A glint of cunning flashed in her eyes as a plan formed in her mind. He turned to leave, ignoring her, but she followed. The woman pestered him, demanding to know what had brought him here. He narrowed his eyes. "You want my money?" Yulikiy asked bluntly. Medi giggled coquettishly, but the sly spark in her gaze said more than words. Yulikiy scowled, snapping as he turned away. "I don't have time for crazy women." She only laughed louder. Pouting, she pretended to be offended, though her eyes still danced with mischief. Then Yulikiy's expression changed. Medi caught it, and for some reason, a blush crept onto her cheeks. "Why are you looking at me like that?" She chuckled. A split second later, she understood. Something moved behind her. A dark figure lunged forward. Everything happened too fast. A blade flashed in the dim light, and a man charged at her with a furious roar. "I've been looking for you, you wretch. Give me back my wife." Medi dodged just in time, barely avoiding the knife. But he didn't stop. She raised an eyebrow, bewildered. What wife was he talking about? She barely had time to sidestep his wild swings while Yulikiy watched, tense and alert. The man was clearly unhinged. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Liar. I know you helped her escape." And then she remembered. The woman, thin, bruised, frightened, as silent as a shadow. Medi's lips curled in disdain. It was his own fault he couldn't keep her. The man let out a guttural snarl and lunged again. Yulikiy barely had time to react before something gleamed in Medi's hand. A gunshot rang out, shattering the night. The man collapsed onto the filthy ground, clutching his leg, howling in agony. "My leg!" Yulikiy froze. His heart pounded wildly, his mind struggling to catch up. This woman had just shot a man in the leg, calmly, right in the middle of the street. He turned to her, stunned. Medi merely smiled, effortlessly spinning the revolver around her finger before tucking it away somewhere in the folds of her clothing. His gaze drifted downward. A torn section of her dress exposed her thigh. He noticed the scars. So many scars. That was how their first meeting unfolded, setting in motion the chain of their wild adventures. The man writhed on the floor, clutching his wound, screaming hysterically that the crazy woman had shot him. His voice cut through the noise of the pub, making everyone freeze. Medi merely raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. She hated holding a gun. It felt disgusting, like touching something sticky and vile. She would have preferred never to use these chunks of metal. But what choice did she have? "Every time I have to hold this dreadful thing, I feel like drinking," she muttered, then turned her gleaming gaze to Yulikiy. "So what do you say, handsome? Shall we have a drink together?" Yulikiy was stunned. His mind struggled to catch up with the past few minutes. The attack, the gunshot, the screams, and then this woman, appearing out of nowhere, acting as if it were just another ordinary evening. His heart pounded. His hands were clammy. Medi noticed. The amusement in her expression flickered, just for a second, replaced by something almost soft. Concern, perhaps. Hey, you all right? She leaned in closer. Yulikiy jerked back violently. How could she talk to him after this? His stomach twisted. The air itself felt suffocating. His hands trembled. Medi blinked, her lips twitching. Then, without another glance at him, she turned to the rest of the pub's patrons. Well then, does anyone want to keep me company on someone else's dime? She called out cheerfully, already rifling through the unconscious attacker's belongings. Yulikiy didn't wait. He turned on his heel and left, his heart clenching painfully in his chest. Memories he had buried deep were clawing their way to the surface. He walked, barely restraining the tremor in his hands. His steps were hurried, frantic, but the moment he stopped, it all crashed over him. The scene from mere minutes ago replayed in his mind. That insane woman hadn't even flinched. She had just pulled the trigger. He gritted his teeth, trying to shove the image away. But the more he fought it, the louder the wounded man's screams echoed in his head. Yulikiy stopped, leaned against the cold stone wall, and closed his eyes. No matter what happens, you must survive. Those words were seared into his memory. The thought of his mother always hurt. He saw her exhausted face, heard the ragged cough tearing through her chest, and his father, alive, smiling, strong. And then, he was just gone. They had found him 3 months later, floating in the lake. Everyone agreed it was suicide. Yulikiy inhaled sharply. If only he could erase those memories, forget, not remember. But he did remember. He knew it wasn't suicide. His father would never. They had been a happy family. Once. And he knew exactly who had taken that from him. His uncle, the one who had oh so conveniently ended up on the throne. Yulikiy ran a shaking hand over his face. He would survive, no matter the cost. Suddenly, darkness swallowed him. A sack over his head, cutting off his breath. He barely managed to reach for his sword before a heavy blow sent him to his knees. He struggled, but strong hands slammed him down. Something tightened around his throat. His pulse pounded in his ears. Coughing, hoarse and broken, somewhere nearby. His mother flashed in his mind, gasping, convulsing, suffocating. His vision blurred, the world slipping away. But then, the grip loosened. The pressure on his throat eased. Yulikiy tore the sack off, coughing, dragging in a breath as his vision cleared. Medi was fighting like a wild beast. Her fists landed with brutal force, sending bodies crashing aside. One of the attackers tried to rise, but she swiftly disarmed him and drove her boot into his ribs. She smirked, breathing hard, her stance unwavering. A thin cut gleamed on her cheek, but she didn't falter. Yulikiy stared, frozen. Medi turned to him, cautious but steady. Her green eyes sparkled with exhilaration. His whole body trembled. Adrenaline surged through his veins. But he couldn't look away. She terrified him, and she fascinated him. Green eyes glinting with thrill, a smirk playing on her lips, danger radiating from every movement. A thought struck him. What if she was an assassin? What if the Emperor had sent her to eliminate him? She stepped toward him. Yulikiy tensed. Then, as if remembering something, she suddenly muttered under her breath and turned away, swiftly looting the unconscious men without so much as glancing at him. Yulikiy watched, stunned, as her hands moved with practiced ease. She pocketed coins, jewelry, small trinkets, effortlessly, naturally. It took him a moment to realize what she was doing. Once satisfied with her spoils, Medi finally turned back to him. Here, this is what's left of your brooch, she said, tossing him a small pouch of coins. He stared at her, uncomprehending. Don't look at me like that, as if you've never met a thief before. You didn't even notice when I picked your pocket. Yulikiy's hand shot up to his chest, searching for the brooch that had been pinned there. Empty. Medi giggled. If we were playing poker, I could strip you down to your underwear, and you wouldn't even notice, she teased, tucking her loot into her satchel. She extended a hand to help him up, but Yulikiy angrily swatted it away. She only laughed, completely unoffended. You know, I'd like to meet you again, she mused, flashing a mischievous grin. I like you. You're handsome. Yulikiy barely heard her. His fingers trembled as he opened the pouch. Inside was a photograph. His photograph. Assassins were hunting him. His head snapped up, scanning the dark alleys. He couldn't stay here. That crazy woman had saved him, without even realizing it. Medi was already turning to leave when he lunged forward and grabbed her wrist. Wait, he said quietly. She looked at him, surprised. Yulikiy swallowed hard. A plan was forming in his mind. He needed someone strong, someone who would make the Emperor forget about him. And this thief, she could become his perfect weapon. Yulikiy gripped her wrist tightly. Medi halted, her eyes flashing with wary surprise. You shouldn't grab people like that, she said, her voice carrying an almost threatening edge as she yanked her arm free. For a brief moment, her expression was serious, but it quickly melted into her usual mocking gaze. Oh my, what's this? A duke so bold he's accosting girls in the middle of the street? Her lips curled into a daring smirk. Yulikiy grimaced, feeling his cheeks tense under the faintest hint of a blush. How do you know who I am? Seriously? She twirled a finger near her temple. In this city, even the rats in the sewers know what the silver-haired duke looks like. She winked playfully, but her expression shifted almost instantly. His face had hardened. Medi noticed the change in his demeanor. She studied him intently, as if making a decision. Then, with a casual flick of her wrist, she gestured for him to follow. They slipped into narrow, dark alleyways. Yulikiy trailed behind in silence, yet with every step, the tension in his chest grew heavier. Tight passageways, no sign of people, damp air thick with the scent of stagnant water. Everything screamed trap. What if she was leading him into an ambush? What if she was planning to sell him to the Emperor? What if she was an assassin? He couldn't trust her, but did he have any other choice? Medi came to an abrupt halt. She turned to him, grinning wide, then motioned toward a cracked wall with chunks of missing plaster. Yulikiy clenched his fists, uneasy. He was about to speak when she pressed her hand against the stone panel. With a low grinding sound, the wall swung open, revealing a dark passage. Welcome to the office, dear client. Yulikiy hesitated. Everything about this place urged him to turn back, but he stepped inside. The room was cluttered with scattered papers, a worn wooden desk standing at its center. Medi dropped into the chair behind it without a care, then gestured lazily toward the seat opposite her. Yulikiy sat, tense and guarded, while she lounged with an air of casual amusement. Well then, Medi leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. I get why you're so suspicious. You must have assassins knocking on your door all the time. Yulikiy's head snapped up, but she barely acknowledged his reaction. Instead, she pulled out a sheet of paper, an inkwell, and a quill. So, let's get started. What exactly are you hiring me for? She twirled the quill between her fingers, lips curling mischievously. Perhaps you need a personal bodyguard? Yulikiy sat perfectly still, tension coiling tight in his body, as if a storm raged inside him. Medi, on the other hand, looked as if she were chatting over a pint of ale. I should warn you, my services aren't cheap, she continued breezily. And I don't work around the clock, so we'll have to discuss terms, hours, and are you loyal to your country? Yulikiy interrupted. Medi fell silent. For the first time, her eyes weren't filled with mockery, only mild surprise. Then, a crooked smile tugged at her lips. A stray like me doesn't have a homeland, she murmured with a shrug. Wherever I lay my head, that's home. And when someone pays me, I'm loyal to the client. Yulikiy studied her, searching her face for a lie. Slowly, he rose to his feet. His movements were deliberate, almost theatrical, but his gaze was deadly serious. I don't care what role you take, bodyguard or something else, but you must be loyal to the country. I need to know you're not a spy. His voice was sharp, and that you're strong enough to protect me. Medi blinked in brief surprise before her lips stretched into a sly smirk. Without a word, her hand dropped to her thigh. She lifted the edge of her tunic slightly, revealing a small dagger. Yulikiy's gaze flickered downward, lingering for just a second too long. Medi giggled. He tore his eyes away, opening his mouth to retort. But before he could, The dagger flashed past his ear, embedding itself into the wall behind him with a dull thud. Yulikiy jerked around. The dagger had skewered a large centipede, which was still twitching in its final convulsions. He turned back to Medi. She looked as if she had simply been playing. "Am a woman of my word. If I'm paid, am loyal to my client. And I can assure you, I'm neither a spy nor an assassin sent by the Emperor." Yulikiy remained silent. He had no doubt that if she were working for the Emperor, he'd already be dead. "Then why were you interested in me from the start?" His voice was quieter but still tinged with suspicion. "And why did you assume I needed a bodyguard?" Medi's face lit up with genuine delight. "I already told you." She propped her chin on her hand, a playful smile dancing on her lips. "You're handsome. Just plain handsome," she repeated as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I love silver hair. And light eyes? That's my ideal." Yulikiy looked as though someone had just struck him over the head with something heavy. "And besides," she added with a shameless wink, "you're paying me. And if I'm getting paid, I'll do everything to protect you." Yulikiy stared at her, bewildered. How could this woman be so dangerous and yet so childish at the same time? "I really can protect you," Medi said breezily, twirling the quill between her fingers. "It all depends on the price. I can work openly or in the shadows. I can even send an attacker's head wherever you need it if you want to send a message." She grinned. "But for jobs far from the city, I charge double. Though, since you're so handsome, I could give you a discount." She laughed again, as if they were discussing something entirely innocent. Yulikiy massaged his temples. She was giving him a headache. "You don't need to worry about attackers," he finally said, cutting through her chatter. "I'll send my people. They'll take care of it." Medi practically bounced in her seat. "Great. I was already dreading having to deal with those stinking corpses." Yulikiy glanced at her, trying to determine whether she was joking or truly that carefree. Now that it's settled, she leaned back in her chair, utterly relaxed. "Let's sign the contract and get something to eat. I'm starving." They argued for a while longer. Medi exhausted the Duke. He wanted to conclude the discussion quickly, but she negotiated like it was her favorite game. "Where did you train?" he asked suddenly when they were close to reaching an agreement. Medi paused, as if she had never considered the question before. "I don't know. I don't remember anything from before." She said it so casually, even smiling. "But I do have a talent for combat and weapons. Where it came from? No idea. I'm great with knives, I can modify weapons, and I shoot better than half the mercenaries." Yulikiy frowned in thought. "You must be from a noble family." Medi's smile turned mysterious and a little sad. She lifted the hem of her skirt, then rolled up her sleeves. Old scars covered her skin, like a map of a past she had lost. "No noble family would ever raise a girl like me." Yulikiy remained silent. Medi slowly lowered herself to one knee before him and took his hand. "If you take me on as your guard, I will protect you." He felt her touch, warm, firm, confident. His heart skipped a beat. "First, we need to settle something," he said, clearing his throat. "Are we speaking formally or casually?" Medi waved a hand dismissively. Details. Let's talk about payment instead, since I'll be guarding you either way." Yulikiy suddenly grabbed her wrist. She blinked at him in surprise. "I don't want to hire a bodyguard," he said sharply. Medi hesitated. For a moment, she looked thrown off, but then her usual playful smirk returned. "Oh, then maybe we should just start dating?" But Yulikiy was no longer listening. The puzzle in his mind had finally come together. If she was by his side, the Emperor would no longer be able to interfere. He looked at her, and the answer became obvious. Marriage. Yulikiy met her gaze directly. "I want to marry you." Medi froze. Her usually carefree face twisted in shock and confusion. "Are you out of your mind?" she exclaimed, trying to pull her hand free. Yulikiy only tightened his grip on her wrist. "You're the best option. You're not the Emperor's agent. You're not someone who gives up easily. And this is a delicate matter. I can't ask just anyone." Medi jerked her arm again, struggling, clearly outraged. "I'm not your servant, not some concubine. You can't just buy me." Yulikiy looked at her calmly. 100 million. Medi fell silent. Her fingers twitched, but her gaze remained unchanged. Yulikiy noticed that tiny crack in her resolve. 1 billion, he continued. "After 3 years of marriage, you'll receive 1 billion in severance." If you want to move abroad, I'll arrange the money and documents for your immigration. All you have to do is pretend to be my wife. Nothing more. I don't like physical contact either." He waited. Medi lowered her head, her face falling into shadow. Yulikiy wasn't sure what was happening until she lifted her eyes to his. They were burning with excitement. "Darling," she cried out gleefully, "where have you been all my life?" Yulikiy blinked. Medi swiftly pulled her hand free and dashed to the table. All right, let's get to the contract details." She grabbed a sheet of paper and prepared the ink. Yulikiy hadn't even recovered when she was already writing. "The wedding must be grand, with lots of guests. In public, we act as madly in love as possible." He grimaced. "Why?" "Because it's fun." She shrugged. They argued a little longer, but eventually agreed on the key terms. Act scandalously and challenge the norms of propriety in public. After the wedding, Yulikiy will pay Medi 100 million. Every month, he will provide her with living expenses. After 3 years, she gets 1 billion and her freedom. Avoid physical contact when no one else is around. The contract is only valid if both of them survive the 3 years. Medi must protect Yulikiy. Medi twirled the quill between her fingers, staring thoughtfully at the list. "Listen, a few things about this are bothering me. First, why are you doing all this? Second, why do we have to act scandalously?" Yulikiy didn't move. He sighed and simply repeated, "You must protect me. That's all you need to know." She was smart, too smart not to understand why Yulikiy was doing this. The emperor wanted to eliminate all heirs, and Yulikiy sought to appear like a worthless scoundrel, someone with no claim to the throne. And now she, Medi, was supposed to be his filthy cover, his disguise. Just another piece in this grand deception. Yulikiy looked at her in surprise, realizing just how perceptive she was. He hadn't expected a girl from the slums, a swindler by trade, to grasp his plans so quickly. He couldn't help but ask, "You're incredibly perceptive, Medi. If you're this smart, why don't you work for some aristocrat? You'd have a good life. Why stay in this cesspool? In these slums?" Medi answered without hesitation, her voice firm, laced with a hint of disdain. "I don't like being subordinate. And even you, Duke, can't make me part of this world where I'd have to serve. I'd rather be a mercenary, free and independent." Yulikiy exhaled darkly, but his expression only grew more resolute. "You need to break the habit of addressing me informally," he said coldly. "I'm a duke. What will people think if you keep speaking to me like this, even when we're engaged?" Medi smiled, immediately understanding why he was saying this. Her voice took on a playful, mocking tone. "Oh, how difficult that will be. But fine, I'll call you darling or beloved. You do want it to look convincing, don't you?" Yulikiy shot her a dark look, but something in his eyes flickered. He knew Medi wouldn't be obedient, that she would struggle to conform to the rules of this world. And yet, it was precisely her defiance and rebellious spirit that drew him in. "I can already see you're going to disgrace me," he muttered with a sigh. "But it has to be convincing. People must believe that I'm in love with you." Medi let out a short laugh, filled with mild contempt. Yulikiy lowered his head slightly, his voice turning cold and resolute. "I'll add one more condition. You don't die, and you stay by my side. We have 3 years to make this believable." Medi raised an eyebrow, looking at him with a mix of unease and intrigue, but eventually nodded. "Okay, that's a little creepy, but fine. Now, when are we setting the wedding date?" Yulikiy seemed unaffected by her irony. His voice was firm. "First, I'll make a proposal, a grand one, so that the entire nation knows. It must be public, and everyone must witness how we experience this together. Do you agree?" A few days later, the Duke's residence was in utter chaos. The servants bustled about, trying to appease their master, who was more anxious and hurried than ever. Maids selected his attire, footmen ran errands, and the butler constantly urged everyone along, reminding them that the Duke was waiting. It was strange. Yulikiy always made decisions on his own, never sought advice, and certainly never allowed anyone to interfere in his affairs. "This is love," exclaimed the young maid wryly, watching the commotion. "He has finally found his destiny." The head housekeeper merely snorted skeptically and scolded her for spouting nonsense. Meanwhile, one of the workers, Meli, approached the butler. He bowed respectfully and reported that the order had been delivered. The butler nodded at Medi but was lost in his own thoughts. He didn't understand what his master was planning. Yulikiy had always been known as a gambler, indifferent to social matters. And now he was dressing up like this. Had he really fallen in love? Medi watched everything unfold with clear curiosity. In the middle of the day, the Duke's carriage stopped in the slums. Yulikiy stepped out, looking like a prince from a fairy tale, holding an enormous bouquet. His formal attire sharply contrasted with the poverty-stricken streets, and his self-assured presence made people stop and stare in astonishment. "Wait here. I'll be back soon. And not alone," he ordered the coachman. Yulikiy walked through the streets, repeating in his mind the script he and Medi had carefully planned. Hundreds of bewildered eyes followed him. People like him rarely, if ever, appeared in places like this. He reached their meeting spot, but Medi wasn't there. His heart clenched. Had she run away? Betrayed the deal? But then, a cheerful voice cut through the air. "Darling, what are you doing here at this hour? I've missed you so much, my love." Yulikiy turned sharply. There stood Medi, smiling, radiant, the very image of joy. She looked utterly enchanting, as if she had truly been waiting for him with eager anticipation. Medi jogged toward him with a light step, her eyes shining, her smile so genuine that Yulikiy felt his heart skip a beat. "Why are you here so early? Did something happen?" she asked, slightly out of breath. She looked casual, enchanting, too enchanting. Yulikiy faltered. They had agreed not to overdo it, but it seemed Medi had no idea what in moderation meant. She tilted her head, peering into his face with a warm laugh. "I was planning to come to you. Why are you always the first?" Her voice was soft and warm, laced with a tenderness that sounded all too real. A small crowd began to gather around them, drawn in by the scene. Yulikiy felt himself drawn in too, mesmerized by how she played her part. She looked like a woman in love. Her eyes sparkled. Her whole presence radiated an intoxicating sincerity. His thoughts began to scatter. He remembered when she once called him handsome. Had she really fallen for him? He froze, forgetting what came next in their plan. Medi furrowed her brow for a moment, sensing his hesitation, then lowered her gaze to the bouquet in his hands. "Are those flowers for me?" she asked, waiting for a reply. Snapping out of his daze, Yulikiy abruptly thrust the bouquet toward her. Medi beamed with delight, running her fingers over the soft petals. "I've never received such a big bouquet before, and with fresh flowers too. Thanks to you, I'm experiencing so many new things for the first time." Yulikiy forgot to breathe for a moment. How did she do that? How could she pretend so convincingly? His heart beat faster at her words, at her expression, this performance that suddenly felt too real. Panic stirred in his chest. Leaning in close, he whispered into her ear, "Don't forget, this is just a game. Keep it together." Medi blushed, her cheeks flushed with color. She fluttered her lashes and, as if about to faint, exclaimed loudly, "Duke, how could you say something like that? People are watching. I'm on the verge of swooning from these feelings." Yulikiy's throat went dry. He was stunned, completely knocked off balance. But the very next moment, her eyes sharpened. She leaned in, and in a low, almost threatening hiss said, "You keep it together, Duke." Yulikiy finally snapped out of it. "It's a show. It's all just a show." And yet his heart kept pounding like it wanted to leap out of his chest. Medi didn't stop. She kept speaking, trying to draw a response from him, to keep the moment alive. She gently squeezed his hand and smiled with that same tenderness that made it hard to tell where the act ended and something else began. "Darling, you look so pale. Maybe we should go somewhere a bit quieter?" Yulikiy straightened suddenly. Enough. He wouldn't let her game confuse him any longer. "No, I'm fine. Just..." He took a deep breath and steadied himself. "I know this isn't the perfect moment, but I can't wait any longer." Medi froze for a second. "What do you mean?" She tilted her head with feigned confusion. "This gorgeous bouquet is more than enough. You're so generous." She tensed, clearly signaling him. "Say it. Now." Yulikiy clasped her hands in his and, before he could talk himself out of it, said, "Medi, will you marry me?" Her expression changed in an instant. True shock appeared in her wide brown eyes. The bouquet slipped from her hands and landed with a dull thud on the dirty street. She abruptly pulled her hands from his and stepped back. Did I hear that right? Is this a joke? Yulikiy didn't fall for her confusion. He stepped forward, took her hand again, and repeated with unwavering seriousness, I want you to be my wife. For us to be together. Always. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few women even began to cry, dabbing their eyes with their aprons. Cheers and exclamations of admiration washed over them like a wave. Medi turned red, like a ripe fruit. I'm sorry, but I can't. She only managed to whisper before turning and bolting. Yulikiy panicked. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This wasn't part of the plan. Without thinking, he ran after her, fully aware that Medi could knock a grown man to the ground. But this time she yielded. His fingers brushed her hand, and then he grabbed her wrist and pulled her tightly to him. There were tears in her eyes. Why are you running away? He panted, but his voice remained firm. Because I don't want to marry you. Yulikiy froze. He couldn't believe his ears. You changed your mind? He grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look him in the eyes. Medi, we have to do this. Why are you backing out all of a sudden? She shut her eyes tightly, as if trying to hold back a storm of emotions. Then she blurted out, because everyone will say, I just clung to you, that I'm chasing the Duke because I'm poor, that I want to live off your wealth. I don't want to endure that. Yulikiy didn't know what to say. This wasn't in the script. Medi had veered off course, and now he didn't know how to react. Suddenly, she threw a handful of small objects at him. A ring, cufflinks, a pocket watch. They clattered to the ground at his feet. Take your gifts back. I don't want to see them. Medi was gasping with rage, her eyes glistening with tears. They remind me of you. Yulikiy nearly laughed. When did she manage to steal all that? But before he could even process the moment, Medi lunged at him, beating his chest with her fists. You're a duke. When people start criticizing you, you'll leave me. So go ahead and leave now. Don't torment me. He didn't move. He just stood there, completely lost. Medi clenched her teeth. If he doesn't react now, we'll lose the moment. Her hands dropped, and she suddenly leaned into his chest, hiding her face. Hold me. Automatically, he wrapped his arms around her. And in that moment, he noticed she smelled like flowers. Tell me you love me. She whispered barely audibly, her lips barely moving. Say you'll never let me go. Yulikiy knew this was an act, and yet the words escaped his lips on their own. Medi continued, prompting him softly, touch my lips with your thumb. He hesitated but obeyed. His thumb gently traced over her lips. What now? But he already knew the answer. Medi stilled, and he leaned in, pretending to kiss her. Their lips almost touched, but his thumb remained between them, a fragile boundary between reality and illusion. The crowd erupted in applause. Now that's a kiss. Huh, and she's just a street rat. What would she know about refined courting? Can't she fall in love too? Everyone falls in love, shouted a woman indignantly. Medi lowered her gaze, flustered, touched, and embarrassed all at once. She looked like she had truly fallen in love. Yulikiy watched her and realized she was the perfect actress. He took another step forward, pulled out the ring, lifted her hand, and said, since the moment I met you, my life has changed. I want to be with you. Always. Medi didn't even have to answer. The crowd did it for her. Duke Yulikiy became a sensation. Every newspaper screamed about the engagement. Duke Yulikiy falls for a girl from the slums. Nameless stranger steals the heart of the country's most notorious playboy. Is it love or madness? The rumors spread like wildfire. And meanwhile, Yulikiy was taking his fiancée to the ducal residence. When they arrived, the servants were stunned. They had seen a lot, but this, still, as shocked as they were, they greeted the Duke and his bride-to-be with proper respect. The kitchen was filled with the aromas of a festive dinner, but the tension among the staff was almost tangible. How could he bring that woman into the estate? The chef grumbled, generously salting Medi's steak. Too generously. Maid Rayleigh timidly spoke up, but you saw how he held her hand. He's truly in love. In love. Our Duke is naive. That con artist has him wrapped around her finger. The butler interrupted the nonsense. Yulikiy has been alone his whole life. And if this woman fills the emptiness in his heart, so be it. The staff fell silent, but suspicion toward the Duke's bride didn't disappear. At the dinner table, Medi was full of compliments. "What a luxurious dinner. And you even cut the meat for me? I've always wanted to try something like this." Playfully, she lifted a piece of steak to Yulikiy's lips. He tasted the steak from Medi's hand and understood immediately. It was salted to the point of being inedible, a clear sign of disrespect toward his fiancée. Without hesitation, he pushed Medi's plate aside and slid his own toward her. "Looks like mine's a bit more cooked, just the way you like it. Take it." Medi looked at him, a faint smile on her lips. He was protecting her, but the real danger was yet to come. She brought a piece of sweet potato to her mouth and froze for a second. Poisoned. Her heart raced, but her expression didn't change. Instead, she lit up with a bright smile. "What an interesting taste. Is this really sweet potato? So unique. Can I have more? Ooh, can I take your portion too?" Without hesitation, Yulikiy slid his plate over to her, completely unaware she had just saved his life. The staff whispered among themselves, but the couple played their roles flawlessly. After dinner, Medi slipped quietly into the kitchen. She already knew who to look for. A soft rustle, barely audible footsteps, and there he was, Meli, one of the workers. He was sprinkling something into a crate of supplies when Medi's cold fingers clamped around his wrist. "So you're the pretty boy who decided to poison the Duke?" Meli jerked in surprise, but a second later, he received a powerful blow and collapsed to his knees. Darkness swallowed him. He woke up in a dim room, hands tied behind his back, eyes blindfolded. Something was in his mouth. "Awake already?" came a familiar mocking voice. He tried to speak, but felt glass in his mouth, a bottle. Medi casually paced in front of him. "Just so you know, I took your little poison bottle, unscrewed the cap, and stuffed a cloth into the mouth of it." She leaned in closer, her breath hot against his ear. "You know what that means, don't you?" Medi's voice was calm, almost casual, but it carried more threat than any blade. "The cloth is soaking in poison right now. Just a few more minutes, and the first drops will slide down your throat." He flinched. The darkness clung to the warehouse walls like damp tar, heavy with must and dust. Meli lay on the cold floor, bound, weakened, fear crushing his throat like iron clamps. Medi stood beside him, arms crossed, her presence as unshakable as stone. "If you don't tell me who sent you," she said coolly, "you'll stay here alone. This is a warehouse, Meli. No one ever comes here. When they find you, it'll be by the smell." His eyes widened with terror. He tried to move his fingers, but they wouldn't respond. His breath came in sharp gasps, his heart pounded. He couldn't speak, not because of the bottle, but because of the threat to his family. Better he died. This was it. The end. Suddenly, the warehouse doors burst open, a flood of lantern light pouring in. "Meli." Yulikiy dropped to his knees beside him. "What happened to him?" "Poison," Medi said flatly. "He was trying to poison you." "That's not true." The Duke's voice trembled. "Meli has served my family for over 10 years. He'd never betray me unless someone threatened him." "Hold on," Yulikiy said, gripping his shoulders. "I'll get the antidote. Why bother?" Medi tilted her head. "He's already confessed. Let him die." Yulikiy shot her a furious glare. "I won't let someone die because of me." Minutes later, Meli was able to speak. His voice was weak, but the words were clear. "Montanando." Yulikiy froze, as if struck. Medi smiled in satisfaction. The Duke stared silently at the man lying before him, broken, guilty. He sighed heavily and said firmly, "As soon as you're well enough, take your family and disappear." Meli didn't speak. He just nodded, not believing he'd been given a chance at life. He was smuggled out of the estate in a sack, unseen by the servants. On the way back, Medi folded her arms and gave Yulikiy a questioning glance. "Why did you give him the medicine? He tried to kill you. If I were you, I wouldn't have hesitated." Yulikiy paused for a moment before answering. "I don't kill people, not even traitors. But your method worked. If I just questioned him, he never would have cracked." She raised an eyebrow, and he added, with a faint smirk, "By the way, it was just a painkiller." But he didn't need to know that. Medi gave a curt nod, but there was respect glinting in her eyes. "By the way," he said, "you ate all the sweet potato. Why didn't the poison affect you?" She smiled mysteriously. Poison just doesn't work on me. Always been that way. Yulikiy said nothing, just cast a brief glance her way. The estate loomed ahead when Medi suddenly asked, "Who is Montan and Ando?" Yulikiy hesitated for a split second. "My uncle," he said, and there was no emotion in his voice at all. Yulikiy followed Medi with his eyes and then calmly repeated, "Count Montan and Ando is my uncle." Medi immediately shot up. Her eyes sparkled with tension as she snapped, "Montan and Ando? You're telling me he is your uncle? I could kill him right now. Yulikiy!" Yulikiy shouted her name, his voice trembling with fear. "Medi, what are you saying?" She suddenly stopped, startled by her own reaction, and fell silent for a moment. Then she said, "It's not a problem for me. If you say it's necessary, I'll do it. You know I promised you'd survive these 3 years." Yulikiy quickly replied, "Don't worry," he said, trying to smile. "I will survive, no matter the cost." They were sitting very close. Yulikiy could feel her gaze pierce straight into his soul. He added, "And thanks to you, I'm still alive today." "Thank you, Medi." Medi didn't answer. Her eyes stayed unreadable, her gaze even deeper now. To lighten the mood, Yulikiy joked, "Why do you sit on the horse so calmly? And why in front of me? You don't even know how to ride, do you?" Medi just laughed softly and smiled. "If you teach me, I'll learn fast. I always pick things up quickly." She giggled and went on, "But why don't you have any personal guards?" "That makes sense." Yulikiy sighed, and a distant sadness crept into his eyes as he replied, "I used to. More than one. But over time, they either fled or died. I've tried to hire new ones. No one agrees to work for me anymore." Medi stayed silent, listening attentively. But deep inside, she could feel her blood boiling from all the unspoken pain. Yulikiy suddenly panicked. What if she left him too? What if she ran like all the rest? He couldn't bear losing another person. What if he gets scared and leave me too? He asked quietly, almost whispering. Medi turned to him sharply, her face lighting up with a wide grin. "I'll be your one and only guard who will never run away, Yulikiy." Yulikiy was taken aback, and his heart nearly stopped at her words. Warmth spread through his chest. She spoke again, a light irony in her voice. "Unless I die, of course." Yulikiy blinked, slightly frowning. He didn't like that kind of joke. But she had already turned away and burst out laughing. "Don't worry. I promised I won't die. Remember? And let the money keep rolling my way." Yulikiy couldn't help but laugh. She made him feel weightless. And just hours ago, he'd been clinging to life. She'd flipped his world upside down. Made him laugh on the day he almost died. He took a deep breath, staring at her. Was he going crazy? Yulikiy helped Medi off the horse, and they walked toward the manor, smiling. They looked so in sync, holding hands, exchanging jokes, laughing. The staff, secretly watching from the windows, were enchanted. They looked like the perfect couple in love. At the door, Yulikiy suddenly stopped and blushed a little. "Maybe tonight you could stay in my room?" he asked, glancing away shyly. Medi gasped theatrically and playfully blushed. "How improper. We're getting married soon anyway. There's no avoiding it," Yulikiy reminded her calmly. She lowered her gaze, pretending to hesitate, but eventually nodded. The staff who overheard had no doubt. This is true love. But just at the threshold of his room, Yulikiy's expression darkened. He sighed. "Give me the ring," he said. "It's a family heirloom." Medi's eyes widened. "And besides," Yulikiy added, "you shouldn't steal anything from the manor. If things start disappearing, the staff might get suspicious. Return everything." Medi rolled her eyes in annoyance, but slowly began shaking out her loot from her dress. Silver spoons, precious stones, and small trinkets spilled onto the carpet, and Yulikiy's eyes widened with every new item. "That's not all," Medi smiled, pulling out a folded piece of paper from somewhere. "Here's our contract." Yulikiy froze. "You even stole that?" Medi laughed. "Important documents like this shouldn't be carried in your pocket. Someone might steal them." She stepped closer and ran her fingers over his shirt. Yulikiy suddenly realized her hand had already been there earlier when she took the contract. When did she even manage that? His face flushed crimson. "You think someone as good-looking as you wouldn't attract attention?" Medi purred, trailing a finger across his shoulder. "You've got such a nice body." "Enough," Yulikiy interrupted, stepping back. The conversation was starting to make him uncomfortable. I have rules. First, you're not allowed to steal anything in this house. Medi crossed her arms and smirked slyly. Yulikiy sighed heavily when she finally agreed. Fine, if that's a term of the contract, I won't argue, she said with a grin. Money's on the line, and I'd do anything for it. That's only the first rule, Yulikiy added. There's a second one. No killing people without a reason. Medi narrowed her eyes, arms still folded. And what if there's an immediate threat? What if someone attacks me? Then what? I said without a reason. He answered calmly. I'm not asking you to be a saint. Just don't throw lies away like they're nothing. She snorted, but said nothing. And the third rule, the last one, Yulikiy looked her straight in the eye. Don't leave me. Medi blinked. Then her smile widened. Wow, how romantic. Yulikiy didn't reply. He remembered that night she saved him the first time, the bloody trail she'd left behind. By the way, those corpses in the street, he said casually. I took care of them, called the guards. They removed the bodies and are looking for witnesses. Her face instantly changed. The smile vanished. Medi turned away sharply, crossing her arms, her lips pressed into a thin line. I told you I'd handle it myself. Yulikiy smiled slightly. It's better if I handle it. Safer for both of us. And it keeps you out of prison. His mother's words echoed in his mind again. Survive, no matter what it costs. And he knew the only way for him to survive and for her to earn was to stick together. Medi finally turned back to him. If it's such a profitable deal, so be it, she said dryly. Then, as if nothing had happened, she calmly began undressing. Yulikiy froze, then immediately flushed bright red. What are you doing? Medi raised an eyebrow. Seriously? You invited me to your room in the middle of the night. What did you expect? Yulikiy felt his whole face burning. She really was going to drive him insane. Medi crossed her arms and scoffed. You re the one who brought me here at night. So do what you must. Yulikiy felt panic rising in his chest. You misunderstood. He waved his hands frantically. That's not why I brought you here. He began stammering, trying to explain himself, reminding her that she was the one who said that once they signed the deal, nothing like that would happen. His voice trembled, words stumbled, and he even started to stutter a little. Medi raised her eyebrows, feigning surprise. Really? But you brought me home like a hopelessly smitten man, publicly confessed your love for me. So tell me, what do newlyweds usually do at night? Yulikiy grabbed his head. I don't plan on having sex with a woman I don't love. He snapped. I only brought you to my room because you stole my ring. I didn't want anyone else to notice. And honestly, enough with the nonsense. Medi burst out laughing. She stomped her foot on the wooden floor, and the sound echoed loudly through the room. Great acoustics. She grinned mischievously and sat down by the bed. Well, Yulikiy, come here. He still had no idea what was going on. Come on, let's shake the bed together, she said cheerfully. Yulikiy froze, then turned beet red as Medi continued. So everyone thinks we're up to something interesting. His ears burned, but he obeyed her. They shook the bed so enthusiastically they were both sweating by the end. Yulikiy lay beside her, breathing heavily, trying to process what had just happened. Suddenly, Medi sat up. I have another idea. Yulikiy tensed up immediately. Her ideas never led to anything good. She rolled her eyes and started rolling around on the bed. We can't let all this sweat go to waste. We need to leave evidence. The sheets must be soaked. Yulikiy rolled his eyes. This was too much. Medi propped herself up on her elbows. Boy, don't you get it? The servants notice these things. If we want to keep our cover, we have to make it look real. Or do you want to get caught and killed? Yulikiy sighed and, grimacing, began to mimic her. When everything was finished, he lay down beside her, staring at the ceiling. Even if the whole world turned against him, she'd definitely save him. At first, he had wanted to become a scoundrel himself, and instead, he'd brought real trash into his home. Yulikiy glanced at Medi and, for a brief moment, wondered what he truly felt for her. Then he quietly said, even if they offer you double the money, don't leave me. He stared into her eyes, trying to figure out whether she could be trusted. He knew in their world, there were more traitors than loyal people. People who'd sell out for a better deal. And if they offer 5 times more? His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed his worry. Medi waved him off like it was a silly question. Yes, yes, of course. I'm not that kind of person. Yulikiy tensed again. Her flippant tone bothered him. And 10 times more? Medi widened her eyes in mock shock. 10, she gasped, covering her mouth like she was overwhelmed by the idea of such a fortune. His face remained stoic, but the corners of his mouth twitched. This isn't funny, Medi laughed, slipping back into her usual role, as if the whole dialogue had been just a game. I'm joking. Go to sleep already. Your pretty face looks so tired. But Yulikiy wasn't about to back down so easily. He turned onto his side, propped his head up with his hand, and stared at her. Are you absolutely sure you won't leave me for any amount of money? Medi sighed, folding his arms. I won't leave. I lie often, but right now I'm telling the truth. He still had doubts, but deep down, he wanted to believe her. For the first time in a long while, there was someone by his side, not out of fear or self-interest, but simply there, even if it had started with a contract. Why do you always mention my face? Was your first love someone who looked like me? Medi tilted her head slightly, her smile softening, losing its usual mockery. You were my first love. Yulikiy wanted to say something in return, but sleep overtook him. His eyes slowly closed, and his breathing evened out. Medi sat beside him a little longer, watching. In the lamplight, his silver hair looked almost white, and his face, usually so tense, was finally at peace. If any bastard comes for you, I'll take care of it, she whispered, her lips nearly brushing his ear. She quietly stood, adjusted the blanket as if by accident, and left the room, letting him sleep in peace. Medi was cheerfully finishing her breakfast, while Yulikiy tensely listened to the whispers of the servants. They were gossiping about last night, how the bed in the master's room creaked, how noisy it had been. Yulikiy felt his cheeks flush, but at the same time, relief washed over him. The plan had worked. Everyone believed they were madly in love newlyweds. He glanced at Medi, who looked completely calm, even pleased. She was a masterful con artist, able to deceive anyone. Here, you've got a telegram, she said nonchalantly, handing him a folded note. Yulikiy looked surprised. He casually waved her off, not even glancing at the paper. Reading at the table is bad manners. He took a sip of hot tea, thinking the conversation was over. But Medi, with a sly smile, began folding the paper slowly. Well then, I'll just throw it away. Too bad you won't find out that your uncle is coming soon. Yulikiy nearly choked. He snatched the telegram from her hands and quickly scanned the lines. The emperor, his uncle, had written in his usual cold, concise manner. Medi is a woman of questionable repute. She's been detained multiple times. Marrying her is a grave mistake. If your late father saw this, he'd be horrified. I will arrive at noon tomorrow to discuss this in person. Yulikiy clenched his jaw. His heart thudded with anger and worry. His uncle already knew everything. He wouldn't wait for explanations. He would simply come and do whatever it took to sabotage the marriage. Yulikiy stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Get ready, he said, staring at Medi. She didn't even flinch, calmly sipping her tea. Why? Why should we prepare for someone who hates us? Yulikiy exhaled loudly, his fists clenched. To get permission to marry, we need approval from 3 family heads. If the emperor doesn't accept us, we're finished. Medi narrowed her eyes, but a moment later, her face lit up with a familiar mischievous smile. All right, if that's what it takes, I'll gladly help lighten your wallet. She jumped up and rushed off to get ready. Yulikiy followed closely behind, nearly stepping on her heels. And don't steal anything. I'll buy you whatever you need. Medi glanced over her shoulder with a sly grin. Why so tense? You're acting like you really love me. Her words struck Yulikiy like thunder out of a clear sky. For a second, he stumbled. Don't joke like that, he said seriously. How could I fall in love with someone like you? But she only laughed brightly, climbing the stairs. The heart is a strange thing. Anything can happen. Yulikiy clenched his fists. Don't even try to make me fall for you. Oh, please, she waved him off. Even if I died and reincarnated, I'd never fall in love with anyone. Yulikiy came to an abrupt halt, stunned by her words. His gaze lingered on her longer than he meant it to. Medi didn't even glance back, walking toward the carriage with steady steps. Just then, the butler, Philip, ran out to them, his face tight with urgency. Yulikiy, you'd better stay at the estate. Something urgent has come up. Medi immediately tensed, her eyes narrowing like a predator's. A chill ran through Yulikiy. Could this really be about Medi? Yulikiy was worried. Images of corpses he hadn't had time to clean up flashed through his mind. He sighed, looked out the window where the carriage was already setting off, and thought bitterly, "This is definitely all because of her." Aloud, he said, "I'll be just a minute. I'll see Medi off. Let one of the maids help her with the shopping." Before letting the girl go, he repeated once more, like a mantra, "Don't steal anything. Don't kill anyone." Understood. Medi made a theatrical bored face and lazily nodded like a child forced to sit through a history lesson. "Yes, Your Grace. I promise to behave like a poodle on a leash." The joke made Yulikiy grimace. His patience with her was beginning to wear thin. "I'm serious," he replied coldly. "You're already under a microscope. Because you're my fiancée. Because of your background." It embarrassed him to say it aloud, but he knew someone else would say it much harsher. Yet Medi, as always, just laughed as if all these warnings were part of a dress rehearsal. "Yes, your lordship. I won't steal, kill, or destroy the empire. Anything else?" She boldly placed her palm over his mouth and continued talking. "Shut up already, or you'll get wrinkles from all this worrying." Yulikiy didn't even have time to react before she suddenly turned her head and shouted across the hall, "The butler has arrived. And the maid too." Rayleigh blinked awkwardly, and a few servants passing by nearly choked on their breakfast. "Watch her," Yulikiy whispered to the girl. "Please." As the carriage rolled away, Medi cheerfully waved from the window with both hands, as if heading off on a honeymoon instead of a supervised shopping trip. She looked happy, too happy. Yulikiy watched her until the carriage disappeared, then turned sharply to the butler. Philip silently handed him a letter. A familiar imperial seal gleamed on the silver envelope. Yulikiy felt a chill down his spine. He took the letter carefully, as if it might explode in his hands. His eyes scanned the lines, and his heartbeat quickened. The carriage rolled along the stone road, the wheels rhythmically thudding like the beat of a carefree song that Medi softly hummed. She sat with her cheek pressed to the cool glass, watching the scenery glide past the window. Her face glowed with a smile. Her eyes sparkled, so carefree, so happy like a child allowed to pick sweets in a shop for the first time. Rayleigh, meanwhile, sat with lips pressed tightly together. Her arms were crossed over her chest, and her eyes, those eyes burned with distrust, like lightning before a storm. Liar, con artist, came from the streets and thinks she can become a duchess. Rayleigh thought angrily. She saw all too well how naive Yulikiy bloomed next to this adventuress. But this wasn't love. No, it was temptation, a trick. She would ruin everything. Everything. And Rayleigh knew. She would do whatever it took to make Medi leave that mansion in disgrace and tears. "Where are we going?" Medi spoke up, leaning closer to the window. "The garden still goes on and on. We left the gates long ago, but the trees, and look, fountains too." Her voice was sincere, even filled with awe. Rayleigh scowled. "This is still part of the estate," she replied dryly. "There are bigger gates ahead. That's when we'll be outside." "So it's all a park? How grand!" Medi exclaimed, and there was not a trace of sarcasm in her tone, only delight. Rayleigh clenched her teeth. Even the way Medi breathed was starting to irritate her. But then the girl's next words caught her completely off guard. "You don't have to call me milady. Just speak however's comfortable. I prefer it that way." Rayleigh paled and blushed all at once, as if slapped across the face. "I can't. When you marry the Duke, you'll be the lady of the house, and I'm just a servant." "We'll think about the wedding later," Medi shrugged, smiling brightly. "Right now I'm just a girl in a carriage, going shopping with good company." Rayleigh said nothing, but something in her chest, in that cold sack where trust was supposed to be, began to melt. Still, she asked, harshly, challengingly, "Did you accept his proposal because you love him?" Medi suddenly fell silent. She stared into the distance, her smile gone. Her voice turned soft, nearly inaudible, Yes, I love him. But there's a chasm between us. He's a duke. I'm no one. I don't get to decide whether we'll be together. If his family says no, he'll back down. He's kind and naive, and I just want, at least for a while, a few days to be happy by his side. Anything could still happen before the wedding. Rayleigh stayed silent. Her heart clenched unexpectedly. She hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected to see tenderness, vulnerability, pain in this bold girl. I'll help you, Riley said. We'll pick the best, the most beautiful dress there is. Medi beamed so sincerely that Riley felt a twinge in her heart. Really? You're the first person I've ever gone shopping with. In my neighborhood, we had, well, at best, a street market. Riley looked down, ashamed of all her previous thoughts, of her anger, her disdain. She no longer saw a thief or a swindler, but a girl with a broken heart, just wanting love. What's your name? Medi leaned closer. I have a terrible memory for names. Suddenly, she reached out her hand to Riley. Riley, the girl whispered. Beautiful name. Sounds like warm rain. You can just call me Medi. And they both laughed. For the first time, genuinely. Meanwhile, in the guest hall of the castle, the atmosphere was as heavy as a thundercloud. Count Montanindo had arrived like a storm, loud and furious. Yulikiy, you must be joking, he growled, arms crossed. Marry that woman? From the slums? I won't even say her name. It sounds like a curse. Yulikiy sipped his tea with calm composure. Uncle, perhaps the journey tired you. I understand the news is unexpected, but… Unexpected? It's disgraceful. The Count cut in. You're a duke, and she's a thief, an actress, a con artist. Someone saw her coming out of prison. Her name is on the tongues of every brothel maid in the capital. She's just running a little late, Yulikiy said, playing the fool. But she'll greet you soon. You'll see how gentle and refined she is. She'll probably spit in my tea, the Count roared again. You're young, naive, and she's fooled you. I'll find you a lady of noble blood. Not this. I already love her. Yulikiy set down his cup and met his uncle's eyes. Love. The Count exploded. Love doesn't feed mouths. It doesn't sign diplomatic treaties. It doesn't build trade routes. He leapt to his feet, waving his arms furiously. His voice thundered through the hall so loudly that servants peeked out from behind the columns in fear. You disgrace our family's honor, our blood, our traditions. How could you fall for some gutter girl? And just then, at the very peak of his dramatic monologue, someone laid a hand on his shoulder. Good afternoon. My name is Medi. Pleasure to meet you. The girl shouted straight into the Count's ear. Montanindo jumped as if struck by a hot poker. What the? Who is this? Get her away from me. She's insane. She just screamed directly into my brain. Medi laughed brightly, leaning a little closer. Sorry. I thought maybe you had trouble hearing. You were yelling so loud, the Count gasped in outrage. And Yulikiy, he was looking at Medi, elegant, refined, with delicately styled hair and a sparkle in her eyes, and he couldn't look away. She really is beautiful, he thought. His heart tightened, started beating faster, dangerously so. Yulikiy rose and walked toward Medi, as if he couldn't take another step without her. Her eyes sparkled with triumph, but her lips wore a restrained, ladylike smile. Did it all go perfectly? She whispered, just for him, never breaking eye contact. Even better than I expected. Yulikiy murmured back, feeling a warm rush of satisfaction rise within him. Riley worked really hard, Medi said, her breath brushing against his neck. Give her a bonus, and a double chocolate pastry. Yulikiy almost laughed, but he held it back. Their scene was only just beginning. Medi, sit beside me, he said more loudly, making sure his uncle heard. Don't stand there like a guest. You're family now. Thank you, Your Grace, Medi replied with a slight curtsy, her voice so composed that even a distinguished duchess might weep with envy. She sat gracefully beside him, folded her hands in her lap, and turned to Yulikiy. Their eyes met. There was so much love between them. Even the portrait on the wall looked moved. Count Montanindo, meanwhile, was turning red with rage. He couldn't bear to look at the lovebirds any longer. But Medi was just getting started. Please bring the wine, she commanded with ceremony. The special one I mentioned on the way. This shall be our little introduction ritual. Yulikiy raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. He knew better than to get in her way. A servant brought 3 glasses filled with a bright green liquid. It shimmered in the sunlight like poisonous emerald fire. A surprise for the Count, Medi smiled. It's called absinthe, the drink of poets, madmen, and a little bit for lovers. The Count frowned, peering into his glass as if staring into an abyss. Isn't absinthe dangerous? He muttered. They say if you drink too much, you might not survive. Well, you're not planning to drink too much, are you? Medi smiled sweetly, raising her glass. Just a sip, though I, for example, always drink in one go. And she did, in a single motion, confidently, as if it were only water. Then she licked her lips and said slowly, if the poison tastes this good, you might not even notice drinking it, and then you just die. The Count froze. The green mist swirling in his glass now seemed far more sinister than mere alcohol. Medi had spoken with the casual ease of someone reading tomorrow's weather. She knows. She definitely knows. And if she knows, then Yulikiy must know too. The Count nearly dropped his glass. In his mind, he raced to thoughts of Medi, that fool who was supposed to slip in the poison. But they'd told him, this morning Medi had vanished. Where was he? Why hadn't he come back? Had Medi gotten rid of him? And Yulikiy, he leaned forward, gazing at his fiancée with adoration. So, Uncle, will you congratulate us on our engagement? The Count turned pale. Suddenly, Medi pulled out a small vial filled with green liquid, the exact same vial Mana and Indo had given Medi. Yulikiy raised his brow in surprise. What's that, Medi? You brought wine with you? Of course, she smiled, licking her lips. Absinthe should be stored in vials like poison bottles. It brings out the flavor, she added with a faint sparkle in her eye. Yulikiy laughed. The main thing is not to overdo it. Otherwise, it's not just the flavor you'll get, it's hallucinations. Oh, I'm careful, Medi replied, and downed the entire vial in one go. The Count froze. That was poison. It had to be. His poison. What have you done? He screamed, lunging toward her. Spit it out. Now, if you drink that much, you'll die on the spot. Why are you looking at me like that? Medi said, slowly turning her head toward the Count, as if I just drank poison. And then she started coughing, at first softly, then harder. She clutched her throat. Medi, Yulikiy sprang to his feet. Medi, what's happening to you? She swayed, dropped the little bottle. It rolled under the table. Then came a gasp, a breath, and Medi lost consciousness, slowly collapsing into Yulikiy's arms. Panic broke out. Get a doctor. The Count howled, clutching his head. Someone call a doctor. She drank poison. She's dead. Oh, God. She's joking. Yulikiy whispered, not quite believing it, but hoping. A joke. Has she gone mad? And at that moment, Medi's body twitched. She giggled softly, almost inaudibly at first, then louder, brighter, like a child who had just pulled off the perfect prank at a school play. She opened her eyes and, lying in Yulikiy's arms, cried out playfully, Well, did I scare you, Count? You turned absolutely white. And she laughed again. Medi's jokes are going to be the death of me, Yulikiy muttered, wagging a playful finger at her. The Count stood motionless by the door, like a statue, his eyes fixed on the shattered glass bottle lying on the marble floor. His eyes widened. His hands trembled. Oh, come back later, he stammered and rushed out. Do visit us again, Count, Medi called after him, waving cheerfully. Once the doors shut and the sound of the carriage wheels faded into the distance, Yulikiy turned to Medi. His face changed sharply, from amused to stern, from half playful to grim. Do you even understand what you just done? He said quietly but firmly. You could have warned me. I thought you. Thought I what? Medi raised an eyebrow, though a playful smile still lingered on her lips. That you actually drank the poison. I thought you were dying. The words burst out of him. Medi fell silent for a moment. Her smile dimmed, but didn't vanish entirely. Yulikiy, did you really believe I drink something deadly? You know me. I switched it, of course. She winked. And yes, it's cute that you were worried. Yulikiy stared at her, then asked, Do you still think he'll give us permission to marry? Why not? Medi replied brightly, turning and heading for the door. You're too pessimistic. Life's like a chess game. Only in my version, I play both sides. He watched her go, stunned. His heart was racing. She quickly told him to return to his room. She still had things to do today. Give me the real poison bottle, he called after her. Medi turned to him with that unbearable, brilliantly enigmatic smile. And what if I actually drank it? Completely by accident. Swallowed it down. She clasped her hands behind her back and laughed merrily. But surely you don't think I'll die? Yulikiy's hands trembled. He turned pale. Was she going to die now? Like his mother? Panic began to rise inside him.